Hello and welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. For our audience, let me set a little context here. 2 weeks ago, the ECIA, the Electronics Component Industry Association, issued an announcement welcoming the industry first AI platform Sluicebox as a new service partner to advance sustainable electronics. Now, this is actually a really important development within our industry and is on the front end of an important trend. So we invited two principals, or a principal from each organization, I should say, to come on and provide a little more detail about this to us. So before we get in the discussion, let me just quickly introduce. I have Victor Meijers from Senior Vice President of ECIA and Trusted Parts. And we have Elmar Kert. He is one of the founders of Sluicebox.ai. So let's start with some context here, Victor. Let's go with you. What was the reasoning intent of ECIA's partnership with Sluicebox?
Yeah, it was really kind of a convergence of a couple of things that were going on within the industry, right? I mean, I think prior to us kind of getting together, it seemed like every conference we went to, there was some discussion about an ESG topic, right? But they were all pretty nebulous. And at the same point in time, I think probably in the latter part of 23, early 24, a lot of our members started reporting that customers were kind of asking for carbon emission data, and everybody within the supply chain, be it manufacturers, distributors, everybody was scrambling to try to get this data. And we collectively realized, uh-oh, nobody has this data, right? So it was a real problem. And just about when that light bulb went off, a third party kind of introduced Elmar and myself. And as we got to talking, we realized that we really kind of had an opportunity here potentially to meet the immediate need of providing data. But really, what was more exciting is potentially giving people long-term the ability to make design decisions based on the impact of carbon emissions and so on and so forth. So we really thought that that was, a concrete way to really impact and implement some of the ESG stuff we've been talking about. So that was pretty fun. And of course, positioning ECIA and Sluicebox both as leaders, thought leaders on this topic, I think was also very appealing. So it's been great. We had to obviously vet their methodology, and so we got some members, subject matter experts from our member companies to spend some time with Sluicebox. And every time we had a call, it seemed like we were getting more and more excited about the prospect. And as they say, the rest is history. So here we are.
Very good. Well, expand a bit about what's driving the demand for the component carbon intelligence from the different parts of the supply chain, as you just indicated. Is this just so that people stay in compliance, or what's really behind this?
Well, I think, Elmar, I think you can chime in as well. I think it started out with regulatory requirements, right? I mean, I think it was basically hey, we need to check the box. We need to get some kind of data for these various things. But I think what we've really seen, which is kind of, I think, exciting, is that a lot of folks are now starting to migrate from just a pure compliance requirement to actually looking at how to differentiate their products by making their products, intentionally more environmentally friendly, right? So we've got some folks in the automotive industry really that are making that part and parcel of their brand, for instance. And we're starting to see more and more of that. I think that's you're seeing that more, right, Elmar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're fully right there, Victor. So if you think about it really, Eric, then these very, very large companies, not just automotive, but also from, the AWSs, Microsoft, and so on and so forth, all these very large companies have a value sort of tied up to them, may it be revenue, but just as a whole in their market cap that eclipses some countries' GDP, right? And so within that supply chain, you have so many companies actually directly feeding into these companies. And so it's really a systemic change, I think, that we're starting to see now with these very large companies really pushing or basically providing pressure to their supply chain to actually get down to the nitty-gritty of, hey, what is the carbon component intelligence for all of these different components sourced that ultimately these companies use to produce goods and services.
Okay. Before we get into, and I want to get into that with you, Elmar, kind of the what and the how, right, of what you're doing there. Let me just ask Victor real quick, because I want to be real clear so people understand kind of what this partnership is, who can leverage it. I know that there's something that, and then also kind of how do you see this impacting the EMS community moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think the EMS community is going to find out really quick if they haven't already, and I think they probably already have in some areas, depending on their customer set. But I think you're going to see that carbon data is going to be a regular requirement for all RFQs, right? It's just going to be part of what people are going to need to provide to their customers. So I think that's just going to be a fact of life. I think before too long. I think it'll present some interesting challenges, right? It'll be interesting to see, this is speculation on my part. Do OEMs come to an EMS company and say, "Hey, here's a budget for the project, right, or for the board. You can decide where what components you pick as long as you come underneath this type of budget." Don't know if but that would make life really interesting, I would think, right, for the
Right.
EMS community. So not quite sure how that's all going to play out, but I would definitely say, hey, bank on making sure that customers have access to this data. Our partnership, I think when we kind of got together and started talking about, what are our goals, it's really two things. One is standardization, and the other one is efficiency. And we'll talk about why we think Sluicebox has got the methodology that we think should be adopted by the industry, as you said. But in terms of efficiency, we kind of looked at the fact that, we're really offering this as a service, access to this data as a service to the industry, right? So we're basically giving component manufacturers, distributors, EMS companies access to this data and really a common place to send their customers, so that they don't have to invest individually in providing, getting resources to provide this data to customers and so on and so forth. So in a very real sense, it's kind of a money saver, right? It saves them money. They don't need to invest. It reduces redundancy, right? We're going to have, they're going to ask one source for the data, not multiple sources. Obviously, it'll drive efficiency and provide consistency throughout the industry, which I think at the early stages is really, really critical, which is why we're kind of doing it this way. If you think about it, Trusted Parts is already got the infrastructure to deliver this data. We've got millions of users, right? So it seems like a natural mechanism to get this data out to the industry quickly. So I think that's kind of the take we have on it at this time.
And Victor, just to be clear, so anybody who uses Trusted Parts can access this data?
Well, we're limiting it to OEM customers for now, right? And again, what we're trying to do is develop that consistency within the industry, and so we want to make sure that we drive it that way. Ultimately, down the road, we'll probably open it up to more people, but right now we're just trying to kind of guide the industry, I think, a little bit, and so there's a little bit more control to it. But anybody can go to Trusted Parts, and request that data in terms of OEMs and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Perfect.
it is behind the firewall. You do have to. It is through our BOM tool. So you do need to request it and get approval for it. So for the time being, anyway.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay, Elmar, let's get into the meat of this here. This is please describe kind of how Sluicebox's generative LCA works. And of course, I had to look up LCA, with all the acronyms in this country. So those of you who are keeping score, that's life cycle assessment. I also saw it referred to as life cycle carbon assessment. So there's another version, I'm not sure. So let you jump in, kind of talk about, describe what it is.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Eric. It sounds like you're an expert already. It is LCS. It does stand for life cycle assessment. You're on the spot here. And so what it really does is it looks into all the materials, all the processes, and everything really involved in creating a component or material from cradle to gate or also to grave. So it really depends on what the life cycle spectrum is that you're looking at here. Often what we see with the components and everything that you also see in Trusted Parts, we're looking at a cradle to gate picture here. So that means we're looking at upstream raw material extraction, transport, energy use, gases, like anything really that also goes into manufacturing until the component leaves the factory gate. Now, for OEMs that are also interested and excited about figuring out, hey, what happens during the use phase of that component and that product and what happens at the end of its life cycle, we can take that into account as well, but that would require a bit more information from that party that actually uses and at the end of the day also disposes that component. So that's sort of the general idea behind that LCA from cradle to grave or cradle to gate. And also what we're doing, and I think what we're really distinctive about is there's two general schools of thought if you were to look at it from a very high level. And so one is the cost-based approach, where you look at the cost of what you're sourcing, all the inputs, all the materials, and based on that, you use global averages to compute the carbon emissions. And so that's not what we do. What we're doing is we're following a different school of thought here, which is process-based analysis. So that LCA that we're doing and automating, where we take expert reasoning and we're using AI to scale that to really quickly and easily assess these components for their carbon emissions, follows really a process-based rigorous methodology where we use exactly and look exactly at the bill of materials, technology nodes, geographic location of manufacturing sites, materials that funnel basically through these sites, semi-finished goods and components that then might travel to different sites for assembly until they are actually done. So we're very strict with making sure that anything that passes through the system and goes into these values actually follows that process-based approach.
Okay. And that's what I was going to ask you, kind of. I know that there are alternative methods out there for this. So what makes, it's a loaded question, but what makes your methodology kind of the preferred one? Is it because because of what you were just saying, because it is going and expanding out so much?
Yeah, just from what we've seen and also what we truly believe is that I think it's a more representative picture if you look at exactly the inputs and outputs on a material and process basis. If you think about the other way of doing this, it might be quicker to just look at a balance sheet or do it for an entire company or for an entire portfolio. It might be quicker to use that financial analysis. However, there's a lot of things that impact that analysis and the eventual carbon output that comes from the calculation. If you think about it, there's really tariffs, there's maybe bulk discounts, anything that really skews that price will then eventually also skew the final PCF or product carbon footprint output really for the product or component in question.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other one out there is also kind of a weight-based system, right? Which, you know, I'm a liberal arts guy, so I had to look LCA up way back when as well. So I'm in your school, but I mean, common sense just tells you that the carbon footprint of a brick and a disk drive aren't the same, right? Regardless of whether they weigh the same or not. And so you can intuitively kind of figure out that, hey, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. And that, just to be clear, and then what it produces is it kind of automates this whole product carbon footprint reporting, right?
Exactly. So what you get at the end is a value measured in kg CO2e, so kilograms of carbon emission equivalents. And so that gives you then a way to compare within your portfolio, but also maybe even to other products. And generally, as you pick components, figure out what is the best way of bringing that product carbon footprint down as well. So that's one way of using it, but then also at the same time, you can use it for disclosures, right? Your customers and your downstream supply chain might be asking for these values. And so you can pass them on to them as well as you make components.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
I think it's really important also just to be clear that this is at the component level, at the part number level, right? So there's other things out there, other methods and numbers out there that take a whole, you know, assembly, but this is actually at the part number level. So you can actually distinguish between one supplier versus another, see for the exact same part, which one's got better, you know, better environmental impact numbers and so on and so forth. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
okay. And Elmar, my understanding is that your methodology has also been approved by both ISO and TÜV-SÜD, right? So tell me why that's important.
So yes, and correction there. So we didn't get approved by ISO specifically, but we have been tested against the ISO 1440 and 44 guidelines. So ISO basically creates the guidelines and says, hey, for you to pass and follow and make a life cycle assessment that follows these guidelines, you need to, you know, hit X, Y, Z boxes and follow certain procedures, and the calculation needs to follow certain input and output methodologies. And so we've used a third-party verifier to actually assess our AI engine, because the thing also that needs to be taken into account here is that LCAs are actually not black boxes. They need to be very transparent by default, because often customers do want to go through third-party verification in the end. And so that means you need to be very transparent about what are all the inputs, what have you used to make that calculation really happen, what are the assumptions, and so on. And so we've taken AI and used it to scale expert reasoning, because usually that's a very long and costly process. When I was at AWS, it took me over a year to make or create just only a handful of lifecycle assessments really in parallel. And so by taking AI and being able to scale that expert reasoning really fast, we can create the analysis and then still show transparently exactly what are the inputs and outputs. And the German verifying body TÜV Süd basically was that body that did the sort of looking under the hood exactly. We showed them everything and they sort of said, okay, you're following perfectly ISO 1440. You're doing exactly basically what a human would do as well, just that you're doing it at lightning speed.
Okay. Now, I know that you've issued a peer-reviewed white paper explaining your methodology, and we'll tell people here at the end how people can access that and see that. But in it, I know that you discuss some of the common myths around carbon emissions. Not to go over all of them, but what do you see as the biggest myth?
I think the biggest one is actually related to what we discussed earlier, that the spend-based method is as representative as the process-based one. So really differentiating, I think, the cost-based approach with the process-based approach, because it doesn't really, to Victor's point, make sense, right? If you think about it, a resource price might go up, and so as such, your carbon emissions technically on paper go up as well. And if they were to go down, your emission profile will go down. So it just doesn't really, I think, doesn't really work out that way, I think.
Yeah. Victor, in agreement, or is there another myth that?
Yeah, I think for sure that one, but I think a couple of the other myths are really related, and that is that suppliers can readily provide this data, right? Component manufacturers can readily provide this data. Number one, number two, that their data is actually accurate, right? What we've seen so far in the field is neither of those is true, and actually one of the really interesting things that we've been able to see with some of the folks that we've gotten involved with is that Sluicebox has been able to work with some of the component manufacturers and actually validate, and in some cases make the numbers that they had come up with even more accurate, right? And so I think that's something that I think somehow everybody thinks, well, component manufacturers must obviously know this. They make the parts, but that's obviously not the case. So
No.
that's
You,
definitely something to think about.
you touched on a point I meant to ask Elmar about before, so I'll do that right now before I move forward. The scope of coverage, right? There's so many electronic components out there, but the scope of coverage that you have currently is quite high. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we cover around over 95% of the available off-the-shelf components. And
Okay.
so what that means is we look at the manufacturing part number. There's a lot of information already attached to these numbers that we can actually utilize and source. So usually if you were to, let's say, buy a component and you want to get an LCA done, you would have to collect a lot of information, or the consultant that you would hire would have to collect a lot of information, do a lot of research, figure out where are things made, how are they being made, what technology node is used, and so on. So all of that research alone will take quite a bit of time. And then there's
Yeah.
a process of emission factor matching, making sure that everything follows that standard, which ISO basically prescribes. And we can automate all of that essentially. And that's why we're really well placed with Trusted Parts also, because they, of course, have the catalog of all these available parts. And so in that way, it's been just like an amazing fit really to reach coverage really fast.
Yeah, no. Thank you for that. We'll talk a little bit more of that in a bit, kind of an element of that. But let me ask you about kind of the impact. We talked about that on I think, Victor, you mentioned that the impact that this could have on for design engineers and the initial design on that. So, Elmar, how does Sluicebox component carbon intelligence feed into those eco design decisions?
Yeah, it's amazing if you think about it. So usually, or how it's been happening over the past few decades is somebody would make a product, a component, a material, a service, and then in hindsight, retrospectively, after that service or product has been produced and like readily being sold in market hundreds and millions of times, then these life cycle assessments are often being made, right? Because getting data is hard. It will take a very long time, and it's just really not connected to uh, the design process and how quickly and with so much agility as these processes often move. The normal old way of doing LCAs is just not aligned. It's just way too slow. It cannot keep up really. And so in that sense, we're now really allowing engineers to, as they pick parts, instead of learning a whole new thing, which is lifecycle assessments here, we're really providing something very quickly and as they pick components, right? So we kind of don't want to take people out of their existing flow, may that be procurement or an engineering perspective, and they're picking parts based on specifications, availability, pricing, and so on. We just want to give them a tool to really quickly have that additional data point and then just keep going with what they're doing and just take it into account the least. And the interesting thing is that a lot of companies and people actually are so enthusiastic about this. What they tell us is also that, well, if I had that data point at hand when I make the decision what component I'm using in my final product, then if everything else is the same, which often is the case in terms of availability, pricing, and technical specifications, then why wouldn't I pick the part that has the lowest carbon emission profile? And so that really struck, and we kind of want to empower and enable people through that.
Yeah. And I'd imagine a lot of people worry about kind of adding costs, like you just said, or slowing down innovation. So, but I'd imagine, and let me just ask, how do your automated LCAs and AI workflows actually accelerate the whole design cycle? It makes it more rapid, doesn't it?
Yeah, potentially. So like Victor said, I think the goal is really democratization and standardization. So instead of adding additional layer of complexity onto anyone's plate, we want to really reduce effort. And what we're seeing is that actually we could probably help with the design process overall, because we have access to all these MPNs and all those catalogs. And so really quickly are being able to not just provide you the carbon specs, but also tell you about, the technological specs, because all of these things very much relate to the output, which is the carbon emission profile.
Yeah. Victor, I wanted to pull you in. I know you talked about design before, but also ask you, how do you think this will change the way companies actually evaluate both the components they'll use, but also the partners that supply those to them?
Yeah, well, I mean, like as we kind of touched on already, right? If you've got two companies making the exact same component from a functionality perspective, right? All things being equal, like Elmar said, right? They're gonna go and pick potentially the one that they can proactively pick that has less impact on the environment. I think a lot of things come into play though if you start thinking about it, because even shipping location, for instance, can have a big impact on the carbon footprint, right? So will it impact choices about where where people are going to manufacture parts, right? More close to the source, if you will, as opposed to on the other side of the planet and having to ship all that stuff in. So I could see lots of different ways that this could potentially impact that. I think in the short term, it's really simple. You've got to provide the data. If you don't have the data, somebody else probably will, right? And so that's going to put you at a negative right away. And I think that's true for component manufacturers as well, right? And they all eventually will need to come up with this data. It's going to become a commodity, just like all the other specs that they have out there. So if you're not providing that data, if you don't have that transparency, I think you're gonna be at a loss, at a disadvantage compared to some of the other manufacturers out there. So lots of different ways I think that this could impact things in the long run.
Okay. Listen, while I have you on there, I mean, we touched on this obviously at the beginning, but with the demand for the component carbon intelligence kind of increasing up and down the supply chain, talk about how ECI is really helping the industry to gain access to this data.
Right. Well, like I said, right. I mean, trusted parts. We kind of when we really started thinking about it, we really thought that this was the enabler to get that data out there quickly. Right. We've already built the infrastructure. Right. The data is actually already there. We can deliver that. As soon as we turn it on, which we will in a couple of weeks. And again, it's a tool, it's an aggregation site that a lot of the industry is already using. So it seems like a natural place to kind of drive everybody to do that. Again, we obviously, it's for the OEMs and stuff that need that data. It's going to be free, which is kind of the model for our site overall, right? It's funded by our participating distributors. So again, this is truly a service that we kind of see ECIA being able to provide to the industry, and with our partnership with Sluicebox. So I think that's really the key to that.
Okay. And Elmar, I know that your Sluicebox current methodology boasts an accuracy level over 90%. We talked before to differentiate that the component coverage was 95% or more. The accuracy level of the methodology is 90%, which is, I guess, sufficient to meet regulatory requirements. But what is still needed to take that even further?
Yeah, and so just also to clarify on that, Eric, it's up to 90. So it would be hard to say, across all these over 1 billion components, it's 90% blanket. It's actually up to, and so it's been really interesting and exciting for us to, in the beginning, as we started building the system really, and then testing it against values that companies have calculated themselves following the same methodology internally, right? So you really got to you could think about it as us just taking an MPN, a manufacturing part number, putting that into our system and no other point of information. And the carbon emission value that came out at the end is often up to 92, 95% accurate when compared with the internal calculations of the component manufacturers, right? And so these component manufacturers have a lot more information available, things that are not really public, right? They have information on chemical use, electricity use on a per site, per component, per manufacturing line basis. And so when we saw that we're that close actually already, that was a huge aha moment, not just for us, but also for the companies that are now turning into our customers as well.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. That's excellent. So, yeah, a concern might be, I would imagine, that component manufacturers worried about confidentiality, right? So when their carbon data becomes part of a BOM level kind of a decision making, how do you address that? I don't know who's more appropriate for that, Victor or Elmar, but maybe both can comment.
Well, I'll jump in real quick. So, the confidentiality thing. So there's a couple of things, right? So obviously, to get the best data, really, kind of to answer part of the question you just asked, I think to get the absolute best, most accurate data, if Sluicebox can work with a component manufacturer and get their primary data, right, that's really the key, right? Then that's the holy grail. But what we publish on Trusted Parts is the end product, the end calculation. We don't divulge anything that goes into that, right? That's not something that the public ever sees. So, and there's NDAs obviously between Sluicebox and the component manufacturer. So we do we really try very hard to make sure that the component manufacturers can feel comfortable with sharing data with Sluicebox, knowing that that's not something that's ever going to be out in the public forum.
Okay. Elmar, anything to add on that?
I think Victor captured it really well. In a nutshell, that value that comes out at the end, it's really just like a single value is impossible to backwards calculate. It's you cannot look at one of these values and then figure out where things are being made, what the recipe might be, and so on. So in that sense, it's very transparent for the customers or for the manufacturers themselves because they have access to the full analysis, right? If they work with us and sort of fill the last 5% to get us from 95 or from 90 to 100. And so they can get a full LCA report. We're talking a 60 to 100 page report detailing everything that really goes into the analysis. But that value, that estimated value that Victor was talking about is really a simple value that cannot be backwards engineered.
Yeah.
To your point, though, I do think that yes, I mean, there's some sensitivity, obviously, to the fact that if you've got two component manufacturers coming up on Trusted Parts, right, for the same part, and we display two different values, yeah, I mean, that's going to be something that's going to be out there, and people are going to compare that, right? Which on one hand, we're sensitive to, and we don't want to create problems, but potentially it also drives those companies to work with Sluicebox to make sure that their data is more accurate. And it also gives their development engineers the opportunity to see where maybe they're lagging, right? And gives them an opportunity to look at their processes and improve those. So we kind of think at the end of the day, I mean, this data will be a commodity, right? It'll be out there just like pricing and everything else, right? You see people that are competitive and less competitive today. You're going to see the same thing for this sort of data. But I really do think it gives the component manufacturers the opportunity to improve their very products.
Yeah. And you led right to what I kind of wanted to ask next, which has to do with the future, right? So what do you see as the future impact of both eco-design and component carbon intelligence on electronic component industry, but also the EMS community, right? That's doing a lot of the assembly today.
You want to go first, Elmar?
Yeah.
I'm always jumping in.
No, all good. I think
he's a shy one too, he told us, right? So
right.
Sorry.
I think one thing that will really play a big role is the eco-design part going forward. Right now, it's customer disclosure is really driving this, but being able to really quickly do, what if analyses and being able to just ask questions also in natural language and see like, hey, what would happen if I were to change something, replace something, sell somewhere else, use a different type of transport, use a different recipe to make something. And I think that will be a huge enablement going into the near future.
I also think from an EMS perspective, I do think it may have some implications in terms of where they manufacture products. And I think at the same point in time, they're probably also going to need to figure out within their own processes, what are they adding to the equation, right? So I think there's going to be lots of different fingers that'll touch this, throughout the supply chain. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it all goes. But I think what's most exciting about it is that we're actually giving the industry, the opportunity to be proactive about how they impact the environment, right? Functionality is always going to drive design. We know that, but this is kind of a new way of looking at things, and I think there's I'm one of the old generation. I'll confess to that immediately. But I think there's a lot of folks coming in, design engineers and so on and so forth, where this is a much bigger concern, right? And I think companies are embracing this throughout the world. And so I think it's a really cool way to be a thought leader, if you will, and kind of ride this wave, because the demand isn't that huge yet, but it's coming, right? I mean, we can see it; it's exponentially growing, and before you know it, it's going to be here. So, lots to look forward to, I think.
Yeah, no. I think you're absolutely well said there, Victor, because I do think that we're on the front end of this, and it is going to be very important for manufacturers. It's going to inform a lot of these decisions, as you've been talking about here. Before we wrap this, I just want to give you each an opportunity. We've covered a lot of ground here in the last half hour. Is there any messages or elements of this that you haven't spoken to that you feel compelled that you'd like to still share? And maybe Elmar, I'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. Maybe just quick here at the end. I think it's important to not wait too long, actually, because we've seen time and time again with the customers, especially doing the old way of doing lifecycle assessments. Often we hear that it takes 2 years to get 20% of the actual process-based data to do the analysis. And so I think AI is really going to speed that up, and there's really no reason to wait. There's even a little bit of a risk, I would say, right? Imagine some of your downstream customers or somebody in the downstream supply chain starts doing their own calculation, right, on your components, on your product. And they might use not the ISO-based methodology or the one that you internally would hope for to use as well. And so all of a sudden, they run with these values and they pass them on. So I think there is also a reputational risk as well. And we've spoken with a few existing customers already about this. And so I would just say to everyone out there, get in touch if you want to know more, even if you just want to get more educational content from us, reach out to Victor and I, and we're super happy to chat.
Good. Victor, anything to add there?
I think we've touched on everything. I think the parting thought I would have is that I think what Sluicebox has created is great, and they're providing carbon emission data today. I'm not going to talk about some of the things around the drawing board, but I think the same methodology can be used for so many other things that impact our industry. And so I think, the future is very bright. I'm really excited that there's a lot more to come, I think. So stay tuned, I guess I would say.
No, I think that's excellent. Good message. Good message. Listen, just to wrap this, let me just wrap it couple of quick messages. First of all, to our EMS listeners, you've been referenced a few times in the course of this discussion. As Victor said at the beginning, currently not necessarily available to you, but you could certainly advocate to your OEM customers to participate and leverage the data that's available now, because I always think of it's the old saying, stuff rolls downhill, right? And the OEM's going to say, tell the EMS, hey, do this, right? Get this for me, and you're going to want this, but you're going to have to leverage your OEM for that. And also, just for follow-up, I think what Elmar just said, that you could reach out to either of them. They're both very findable on the internet and on LinkedIn, where I see them. But for more information, I would encourage you to see the blog that's currently on trustedpart.com that goes into additional detail. And you can also download the white paper there that was recently published by Sluicebox, I believe. That's correct, right, Victor?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So that was referenced. So definitely take a look at that if you wanted more information. Then take these gentlemen up on their offer to have further conversations. He is Elmar. Hold on, I'm pointing the wrong way. He is Elmar. He is Victor. Reach out to them. They clearly, I think this is a fantastic development.
We don't look anything alike, so you shouldn't get us confused.
Right, exactly. And they put me in the middle. So, but reach out to them. I think this is, as Elmar said, we're at the beginning of this, and don't wait. So at the very least, jump on, like I just said, to the Trust Part site and get the information. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this. It's exciting. Hopefully we can do a follow-up in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Cheers. Thank you.